Human civilization will not survive unless the United States takes a leading position in dealing with and overcoming the very severe crises that we face. The United States, the most powerful country, not only in the world, but in human history, is nothing to compare with it. What the United States does has an overwhelming impact on what happens in the world. When the United States pulls out pulls out of the Paris agreements on dealing with climate change, and insists on maximizing the use of fossil fuels and dismantling the regulatory apparatus that provides some mitigation. When the United States does that, as it did under Trump, it's a blow to the future of civilization. When Republican states today, right now, say they're going to punish corporations that seek to take climate change into account in their investments, the US is telling the world, we want to destroy all of us. Again, not their words, but their import. That's what they mean. So as long as we have a political organization dedicated to gaining power at any cost, maximizing profit, no matter what the consequences.
In many of your works, you illustrate the economic doctrines that America imposes on other countries, like asymmetric free trade agreements and overthrowing leaders, outright to just exploit resources and labor power. So what I was wondering is it necessary for us to do this if we want the American economy to prosper?
Well, first of all, remember, the U.S. is just following in the paths of every other imperial power. It's not, new circumstances, but it's doing what Britain did, what France did, what other great powers have done in their day in the sun. And it's easily understandable. The question that you're raising is quite an interesting one. So what's the impact of this on the American population? Does the American population gain from it? Well, it's pretty hard to measure precisely. But in the case of the British Empire, which has a much longer history, there have been attempts by economic historians to try to do a cost-benefit analysis of the British Empire. So like, how much did they gain? How much did it cost? It's imprecise. You can't put much faith in the figures. There's too many variables. But the rather rough conclusion seems to be that the costs and benefits more or less balance, that there's a lot of benefits, there's a lot of costs, and they're kind of in the same range, roughly. So why have an empire? Well, the answer to that comes out as soon as you ask who paid the costs, who got the gains, okay? If you look at that, it turns out that the British Empire is essentially class war internal to England. The people who had the gains, are the people who had shares in the East India Company, the banks in the City of London, and so on and so forth. Enormous gains. Who paid the costs? Well, the sailors who were dragooned into the British Navy, the poorer population, and so on. So it's essentially a form of class war. I think if you look at the American-dominated system, it's pretty similar. So take, say, the war in Vietnam, which I discussed. The planners understood what they were doing. They wanted to destroy that virus before it spread contagion. The same reasons why they imposed dictatorships at the same time in Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and so on. They're kind of like South America. So from their point of view, it was a success. They killed the virus. They prevented contagion. The region didn't move towards independent development. It'll a long way from it. And it remains pretty much under Western domination. Not exactly everything they wanted, but pretty much. How about the costs? Well, 60,000 American soldiers were killed. Severe economic problems within the country led to stagflation. In fact, it laid the basis for the developments that took place in the 1970s by severely harming the economy. Then comes all the things that followed. And I think if you take a look case by case, it's sort of like that. Take the Iraq invasion. It's probably several $1 trillion. Thousands of soldiers killed. Pretty big, it sharply increased terrorism. I don't know how you put a measure on that, but as predicted, it was predicted that the Iraq invasion would increase terrorism. The intelligence agencies predicted that, the British and American independent experts, and it did. Terrorism went up by a factor of 7. That's big, the year after the invasion. And it spread well beyond. It led to it increased the perception in the Muslim world, which is very high, that the U.S. is in a war with Islam. You take a look at polls in the Arab world, the Muslim world, there's an overwhelming feeling that the U.S. is at war with Islam. And that, that not only provides a basis, kind of a reservoir for terrorism, we got to defend ourselves, but also just strong anti-U.S. feelings, which show up in all kinds of ways. How do you measure that? You can't put a number on it, but it's certainly harmful to the people of the country and their future. Well, that's the downside. The upside is, whatever you win from it. Not most of the population, but others. And I think that if you look, I think it's a very important question and should be looked at. Frankly, I don't think that it's the right criterion to determine whether an invasion is correct or whether terror is correct. Like you don't ask, suppose Hitler had actually won the war. Well, would it have benefited the German population? It's not the right question, But nevertheless, though it's not the right question, you can ask it. And you can ask it for the British Empire, for French atrocities in Africa, which are horrendous, U.S. policy, and so on. And I think if you look at it, it usually turns out to be something roughly like this. It's kind of internal class war within the imperial society.